The first time I heard the gunshot, I didn't scream. I just dropped to the pavement, breath locked in my throat, rain stinging my face like needles. The red beam cut through the mist, sliding over the hood of my car, and for a second, I thought it had found me. My pulse slammed in my ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. Somewhere between the thunder and the smell of gasoline, I realized I wasn't supposed to be alive. I crawled behind the car door, shaking, trying to steady my breathing. The radio still played soft, static, and in that blur of noise, a voice came through. Calm. Deliberate. Unmistakable. You never learned how to follow orders, Anna. My whole body froze. Grant Walker. My stepfather. The man who raised me to stand straight, speak little, and obey without hesitation. The man who taught me to fear silence because it meant disappointment was coming. People think trauma hits all at once. For me, it seeped in slowly, like fog through a broken window. 1 second, I was a soldier trained to react next text. I was a child again, standing barefoot on cold tile, counting the seconds between the sound of his boots and the slam of the door. Grant never hit me. He didn't have to. His voice did the work. Discipline is love, he'd say, while my mother nodded with a nervous smile that never reached her eyes. After my father's funeral, Grant arrived wearing his medals and that confident half-smile that made neighbors trust him instantly. He promised my mother he'd keep our home structured. What he built instead was a barracks. We woke up to a whistle, ate breakfast in silence, and stood at attention when he entered the room. I learned to iron my shirts with hospital corners before I learned how to braid my hair. The first time I left a book open on the table, he slammed it shut so hard the dishes rattled. Orders first, curiosity later. My mother placed a hand on his arm, whispering, "She's just a child." But her voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. Later that night, she told me he meant well, that he only wanted me to be strong. I nodded, even though I knew what she really meant was, don't make him angry. Every inch of the house smelled like shoe polish and fear. The hallway mirror became my enemy. I'd stare at it before school, practicing how to keep my expression blank. Emotions were a weakness. Questions were rebellion. I kept a notebook hidden under the loose floorboard in my room, writing down the things I wasn't allowed to say out loud. The first line read, "I want to leave." By the time I was 16, I didn't dream of freedom. I dreamed of silence. Not the kind that hung heavy in our house, but the kind that didn't hurt. The day I enlisted, Grant called it inevitable. He said I was made for the system, for order, for command. What he didn't know was that I joined to escape his voice. The Army's orders were easier. They didn't pretend to be in love. Now, years later, crouched behind a car on a dark road, his voice still echoed the same way it did in that house. Cold, calm, calculated. It wasn't the sound of a man losing control. It was the sound of a man who never had to raise his voice to own everything around him, including me. That night, as rain soaked through my jacket, I finally understood something that had taken me decades to see. Grant didn't raise me to be strong. He raised me to be obedient. And when obedience failed him, he decided to remind me what disobedience costs. I remember the color of the sky that night. It was the kind of black that didn't reflect headlights, just swallowed them. The rain had turned the road into glass, and I was alone, driving through the outskirts of Camp Ashford, headed nowhere in particular. I wasn't running. Not yet. I was just trying to breathe in a place that didn't feel like him. Then I saw it. A thin red beam swept across my steering wheel, steady and deliberate. My hands locked around the wheel. My breath caught. For a second, I thought it was my imagination. Then the windshield shattered. The sound wasn't like in movies. It was sharper, like bones snapping. I flinched, glass cutting my cheek, the car jolting hard to the right. Metal scraped against asphalt. I couldn't see. I couldn't think. The car spun once, then slammed into a ditch. My shoulder screamed. Smoke filled the air. My chest burned. The smell of blood and gasoline blended, and for a moment, I thought I was back in uniform, in some training sim gone wrong. But this wasn't a simulation. This was personal. Somewhere beneath the panic, I reached for the radio to call for help. That's when I heard him. His voice didn't come from outside. It came from inside the car. The radio flickered with static. And then, clear as a whisper in my ear, he spoke. "You still don't know how to follow orders." My stomach turned. My fingers froze. I knew that voice. Grant Walker, the man who taught me how to stand tall, then made sure I stayed small. The man who told me loyalty was strength, and questioning him was weakness. I hadn't spoken to him in years. Not since I cut off contact for good. But there he was. Inside my car. Inside my head. Not angry. Just calm. That calm scared me more than the gunshot. I pressed my fingers against the bleeding wound on my shoulder and tried to stay conscious. My pulse thudded like a war drum. This wasn't random. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a mistake. He'd sent someone. He knew where I was, and he wanted me to know it. I'd survived deployments, loss, and betrayal. But nothing prepared me for the moment. I realized my stepfather had decided I was a threat. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd finally stopped living by his rules. The bullet wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to remind me. He still thought I belonged to him. And in that moment, surrounded by shattered glass and smoke, I realized something else. He hadn't failed to break me when I was a child. He just waited for the right time to finish the job. I was 8 when my real dad died. I remember the day perfectly. My mom got the call just after breakfast, her hands still wet from washing dishes. She dropped the phone and didn't speak for a long time. That night, she held me in the dark and whispered that Daddy was flying with angels now. I believed her, because I needed to. 2 weeks later, Grant Walker moved in. He wore his uniform like armor and shook hands with everyone at the funeral like he was hosting a press event. My mom said he was a friend of my dad's from training. He said he'd help us restore structure. I didn't know what that meant, but I learned fast. Morning drills replaced cartoons. A whistle replaced my alarm clock. He brought a clipboard to breakfast and timed how long it took us to finish our food. He made me call him Sir instead of Dad. My mother, who used to sing while cooking, stopped humming altogether. One night, I left a crayon drawing of my father on the fridge. The next morning, it was gone. Replaced with a printed schedule. I asked where it went. Grant told me there was no room for ghosts in his command. I didn't understand what he meant until he locked away my dad's photo albums and boxed up everything with his handwriting on it. I once found my father's old leather journal. I tucked it under my bed, thinking I could read it at night. A week later, it vanished too. Grant never said a word, but his smile that morning felt like a warning. At first, I thought maybe my mom didn't know. That maybe she'd find my drawings in the trash and cry. But she didn't. She just told me not to upset Grant. That he was doing his best. I saw her hands tremble every time he walked into the room. She flinched at sudden noises. But she never spoke against him. I think she thought silence was safety. I started writing letters to my dad. I didn't know where to send them, so I addressed them to the stars. I'd read them out loud when no one was home, then hide them under the floorboard in my closet. Years later, when I came back to that house, I found those same letters. Still sealed, but now stamped in red ink. One word on every envelope. Selfish. I couldn't breathe. He'd found them, and instead of throwing them away, he used them to remind me I was never supposed to speak. That was the day I realized Grant hadn't just taken control of the house. He'd erased me from it. Every trace of who I was before him, every photo, every letter, every memory was buried under his version of discipline. My father didn't leave me. Grant took him away piece by piece, until even my memories felt dangerous. And somehow, he made me think it was my fault. If I had just followed orders better, maybe none of it would have happened. But it did. And now, all that was left was the quiet ache of what he stole. Not just my childhood, my voice, my story, my right to remember. I started digging the same night. I got home from the hospital. My shoulder was stitched, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that red beam on my steering wheel and felt the cold edge of Grant's voice through the radio. I knew he'd done it. I just didn't know how, or why now. The first clue came from a bank statement I pulled from my mom's account. A large transfer stood out, $9,800 labeled as training support, routed to a company I didn't recognize at first. But the name hit like a brick once I looked it up. Walker Strategic Defense, Grant's post-retirement consulting firm. I clicked deeper and found a list of shell payments, masked as equipment fees. One name jumped out, Clint Moreno, a retired sniper with records that disappeared halfway through his file. He'd served at Camp Ashford. I remembered him vaguely. Always kept to himself. Limped on his left side. The dates matched too perfectly. The payment came 1 week before I was shot. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not just from fear, but recognition. Grant had always said, discipline was about foresight. Planning. He didn't just hurt people. He built systems that did it for him. And I just followed a trail right to his front door. That night, I got an email from an anonymous sender. No name, no signature, just 2 sentences. Stay in line or disappear. My mouth went dry. My first instinct was to delete it, pretend it didn't exist, but I didn't. I forwarded it to an external backup, encrypted the server, and wrote down everything I had so far. For the first time in years, I felt the military training in my bones sharpen into something useful. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't lost. I was on a mission. Grant had spent his life teaching me how to track, analyze, and survive. He just never thought I'd turn those skills against him. I printed every file. I took photos of receipts. I cross-checked Clint Moreno's last known address with a list of inactive contractors. I couldn't prove anything yet. Not in court. But my gut knew. Grant hadn't just tried to scare me. He wanted me quiet. Gone. But I wasn't the girl who obeyed anymore. I looked at the message one last time before shutting off the monitor. The threat was clear, but so was the mistake. He warned me. That meant he was worried. And if Grant Walker was worried, I was getting close. The file took a few seconds to load. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, sweating even though the room was cold. When the footage finally played, I almost stopped breathing. The video was grainy, like something pulled from an old surveillance tape, but the timestamp was clear. June 9th, 2:03 a.m., the exact minute the bullet sliced through my shoulder. A black SUV sat idling near the tree line, headlights off. The camera angle shifted slightly, and that's when I saw him. Grant Walker, my stepfather, sitting behind the wheel, hands folded neatly, watching. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just sat there, calm as a man watching a weather report. Tears stung my eyes, but I couldn't look away. This wasn't secondhand evidence. It wasn't guesswork. It was him, at the scene, present, in control. The same man who'd stood behind podiums and talked about service and loyalty and the strength of moral leadership. I remembered one speech in particular. He'd given it at a ceremony just a month before. His voice was full of pride. Leadership, he said, isn't about power. It's about accountability. And the crowd applauded like he was a prophet. I kept playing the footage, hands shaking, and then the sound kicked in. There was static at first, then a short click. Then his voice. Just close enough to make her remember discipline. The words knocked the air out of my lungs. He didn't want me dead. He wanted me broken. Again, the screen blurred. I didn't know if it was the low resolution or my own tears. My body curled in on itself, and for the first time since I was a kid, I sobbed so hard I couldn't catch my breath. All the lies, all the drills, all the whispered warnings disguised as love They snapped like wires inside me. He'd watched me bleed, then raised a toast to his own greatness. I saw it all in my mind. His smug smile, his steady voice. The way people trusted him was because he never looked angry. But now I knew. He didn't need to look angry. He just needed to look in control. And that control had nearly cost me my life. I stayed curled up on the floor for a long time. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to accept what I'd seen. But the truth had a pulse now. It was alive and pounding through every inch of my body. He was no longer a shadow from my past. He was a present threat. And I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was his loose end. I picked up the drive, placed it into a new folder, and backed up everything 3 times. Then I stared into the mirror across the room. My face was pale, eyes red, lips trembling. But there was something else too. Fire. I wasn't broken. I was waking up. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready. I didn't run. I regrouped. Every move I made after that night was deliberate. I reached out to the few people I still trusted from my service years. Not many, but enough. Laya Crow was the first. She'd worked intel in Kandahar and never lost that edge. She didn't ask why I needed her help, just said, "Give me a drive and a deadline." We built a case, quietly. I archived everything. Dashcam footage, transaction records, audio clips. I even found a second backup of Grant's orders, hidden inside an encrypted server labeled Legacy. His arrogance had left fingerprints everywhere. He thought his name protected him, that his smile and medals could silence facts. He forgot I was his student. The ceremony was scheduled for a Friday night. Grand ballroom, black tie, Mentor of the Year, printed on banners in gold. Grant stood at the top of the program, his name glowing under the lights. I arrived an hour early, dressed in black. Calm. Not to crash the event. To execute a mission. Laya was in position by the AV booth. Foster, a federal contact with a quiet voice and steady hands, sat 2 rows ahead. The crowd buzzed with champagne and rehearsed applause. Grant took the stage exactly on time. His voice, smooth as ever, began its familiar speech. "Leadership," he said, "is about family, and family teaches discipline through love." That was my cue. The projector screen behind him flickered. For a moment, the crowd thought it was part of the show, until the image sharpened. A car is parked under trees. Headlights off. A man in the driver's seat. His face is clear. Grant Walker. His voice followed, just close enough to make her remember discipline. The ballroom froze. Grant turned. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The footage looped. Then, the audio played again. One line. Over and over. He reached for the mic, shouting about lies, betrayal, and mental instability. But the agents were already moving. 2 of them. Fast and quiet. Foster stood beside him before he could step off the stage. I walked forward slowly. The crowd parted like water. When I reached the front, I looked straight into the lens of the main broadcast camera. My voice didn't shake. Family doesn't hire snipers. They hide behind medals and call it love. Grant's hands clenched, but the cuffs went on. He shouted something about loyalty. I didn't listen. The applause that followed wasn't loud. But it was real. And it wasn't for him. It was for the truth. As he was led off stage, I stood in his spotlight. Not as his soldier, not as his daughter, but as the woman who finally said no. The cabin sits on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. The porch creaks when the wind hits just right. It's not much, but it's mine. I teach a small survival course here now. A handful of women, all veterans, all carrying more than their gear. We learn how to track, repair, and breathe again. Most days are quiet. We move through routines without pressure. No barking orders. Just soft corrections and space to grow. I don't need to be in charge. I just need to make sure no one feels erased. Maya is the youngest in the group. She flinches when doors close too hard, keeps her phone off during class. Last week, after everyone left, she lingered behind. She asked if I ever felt like my voice disappeared. I handed her a compass from the supply box and said, it wasn't gone. It was waiting for the right direction. That night, she walked to the edge of the shoreline alone, didn't look back once. I watched her until the ocean swallowed her shape. Not with fear, with something close to pride. There's still a scar on my shoulder, a faint reminder of where the bullet entered. I touch it sometimes, not out of anger, but to remember. That night didn't break me. It woke me. Grant tried to control the silence. Now I choose it. In the mornings, the waves roll like breath. Steady. Free. I sit on the porch with my journal and write what I never had the words for back then. Not revenge. Not victory. Just truth. My voice wasn't lost. It was reborn.